Tēnā tātou. Welcome everyone to the Council briefing of 24th of June 2026. I'll ask Councillor Emmink to open our meeting with a karakia, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Karakia tīmatanga. Whakatakatahau ki te uru, whakatakatahau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi, hiki ana te atukura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, tihei, Māori ora.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll just say if other councillors would like to participate in saying karakia at the beginning of our meetings, let me know, because I tend to fall on the same people, but I think it's nice to give different people a chance. So welcome councillor staff, members of the public, either present or online, or those watching at a later date. Council briefings are recorded. Public galleries attendees' presence implies your consent to being broadcast. Health and safety, in case of an emergency, follow the building wardens to the nearest exit. The meeting point is located across the road at Peace Park on Boone Street, and bathroom facilities are located opposite the Chambers foyer entrance. We have two apologies this morning, one from Jessie Morgan Ranui and one from Councillor Tony Boynton. Could I have a mover to... Oh, we don't need to do that because it's a briefing. So, yeah, just to acknowledge that we've got two apologies for this morning. Thank you. Do we have any acknowledgements anyone would like to make? We have no public presentations, and so we'll move straight to the first item on the agenda, which is the long-term plan communication strategy. And Liz Taylor, welcome you to the table.
Kia ora koutou.
Put in your hands.
Good morning all. Today we are going to be talking about all things comms and engagement with relation to the LTP. It's about getting your overall endorsement on the comms and engagement strategy, the overarching strategy for the long-term plan. And also I'm really keen to hear some clear direction from you with regard to how we then approach our comms pathway between now and formal consultation in March of next year. We've also got a little bit of some housekeeping comms reminders for good measure. We do have obviously some newbies around the table, so a nice refresher for those who have done an LTP before, and a bit of a crash course for those who are new. So I'll take the overarching strategy in the slide deck as read. We'll zoom through the big picture before discussing next steps. And I think in terms of a plan of attack for the presentation, I'll kind of go through it and then I'll take questions at the end. You might need to move for me, Louise. Okay, thank you. So before we dive in, a bit of a crash course, like I said. What do we actually mean by community engagement? We're not talking about spin or marketing. This is core council business. The Local Government Act requires councils to actively inform, consult and engage in a way that enables participation in decision making. It's about working with our communities to shape decisions, not telling them what we've decided. So community engagement is where individuals and identified groups from the community are invited to participate in policy and development. The International Association of Public Participation, otherwise known as IAP2, defines engagement as an internal process with the specific purpose of working across organisations, stakeholders and communities to shape the decisions or actions of members of the community in relation to a problem, an opportunity or an outcome. So community engagement can involve one or more of the following elements for any one project, and that's informing, consulting, involving, collaborating and empowering. But the key thing to remember is that it's not just one moment. It is a process over time, and it can involve one or more of those key components that I just listed. So there are also three main types of engagement that we carry out here at Council. Informal or early pre-engagement, formal consultation, and what we call the SCP, Special Consultative Procedure. Informal or pre-engagement happens early on in a project. It's often exploratory, more flexible than formal consultation. For example, we might gather ideas on how a new park might be designed. We might use a short survey or a map where people can drop ideas on specific locations, etc. We might run a workshop. And there might be multiple rounds of this early engagement. It's about testing ideas to inform a bigger project. In the current Awakiri Structure Plan reference group, this is a really good example of this in action at the moment. Formal consultation is a type of engagement that informs a specific decision that has to be made by Council. It's a more structured process. It usually focuses on testing specific outcomes with the community, and generally there'll be a consultation document and a preferred option as well. An SCP is a legally required process under the Local Government Act. It has specific requirements. These are the likes of a statement of proposal, advertising in the likes of newspapers and radio, for example, and a minimum 1 month submission period before a decision is made. There's also the opportunity for members of the public to speak in hearings as well. And a long-term plan, adopting or amending a long-term plan or revoking a bylaw is something that a SCP kind of falls under. And what's important here is timing. Sometimes, if we wait until formal consultation and we don't do pre-engagement, we can potentially lose a big opportunity to gain that feedback. Sometimes that real value comes from hearing people early to inform that kind of overall thinking. Okay, so before kind of launching into the overall CNE approach for the LTP, I just want to reiterate, and I did say this at an earlier presentation as well, this is your long-term plan, and this is your communications and engagement strategy. It belongs to you as elected members. It's not something that's owned by the comms team, and it's not something that we run in isolation. Our role is to support, guide and enable you, but the voice and the tone and ultimately the connection with our communities is yours to own. You will be the ones having those conversations with our communities, and you will be the ones that our communities turn to for clarity, for reassurance and for leadership. But it is very much a shared approach. We will bring the strategy, we will bring the tools, we will bring the coordination and the implementation. We will bring clarity and work to ensure that really complex council information is simple and easy to understand. The comms team applies something called the kitchen table test. And the idea is that anyone receiving council information, particularly with regard to consultation, they can easily discuss it at the kitchen table. So the goal of the strategy is not 100% agreement with our communities, but rather it's, have we heard the right voices early enough to make those defensible and quite hard decisions? So in relation to the long-term plan, these are some key aspirations, what good looks like for comms and engagement for this LTP. And I think the big shift here from other times is really about being upfront and honest about the reality that we're facing. Costs are up and we can't do everything. So I propose we focus on questions that people actually ask. What does this mean for my rates? What does this mean for my services and my future? While also being genuinely transparent about choices and where people actually have genuine influence, making it really easy to participate, and also reaching beyond the usual submitters. They will bring their voice regardless. The strategy wants to hear from those who we don't always hear from. And ultimately, this is about working to build trust, not just awareness. And in practice, this will look like fewer, oh, I didn't know about that, and more, okay, I disagree, but I understand why. So the overarching approach for the long-term plan comms and engagement strategy is very simple. It's be where the people are. It recognises the work, the conversations and the decisions that have already come before and will already inform this long-term plan while deliberately showing up differently. Rather than expecting people to constantly come to us, this approach will build on the successful engagement model that we used in the 2025 elections campaign. And that means intentionally meeting people where they already are, in their communities, online, everyday spaces, and creating those opportunities that feel really genuine to have that dialogue that feels relevant and accessible and actually really worth participating in. The approach prioritises two-way conversations, not one-way, that reflect real-life experiences, pressures and priorities. And it's designed to help people clearly see how their voices connect to decision-making while being really transparent and realistic about the level of influence people actually have through the long-term plan process. And our engagement promise is very clear as well. We'll show up, we'll listen, we'll be clear, and we'll close the loop. So how are we going to approach our comms pathway for this LTP? And this is very much a scene set, not a decision slide. What you're looking at here is just one of many options that we could use to approach our comms pathway for the next year. Nothing's locked in, nothing's been decided. This is very much early thinking to start this conversation and work through what the right level of conversation with our communities might just look like. So the core question I really need you to think about is how much do we test up front and how much context do we give people before we get into formal consultation, if any. I also want to make it really clear as well that doing nothing is an option. We don't have to do any pre-engagement. We don't have to do anything at all until formal consultation next year. That's a real option. We could rely on the annual plan information campaign and kind of weave that into the remainder of the year to help build awareness of the context that we're operating in, and then we could go straight into formal LTP consultation. Now that is the most cost and resource efficient option, and realistically we do have a lot of noise going on as well with government reform, waters transitions, etc., etc. But the trade-off there is that we do go into formal consultation in March next year a bit colder without that early temperature check. So keep that in mind as well. And if we do go down the road of pre-engagement, what is our objective? What are we actually asking our communities? What do we want to hear from them? So throughout April and May, you've been workshopping the long-term plan's strategic priorities, and you've begun that process of narrowing down those key areas of focus for the next LTP. And as you know, that direction and those strategic priorities are not yet finalised. So once those are agreed to and formalised by you, then we have some more solidified options in terms of how we can approach pre-engagement this side of Christmas if we were to do so. And so I feel like the aim for that would be asking our communities to sense check whether we're focusing on the right priorities before we commence drafting the LTP later on in the year and then into formal consultation. So it would be about getting in early as a targeted pulse check on those priorities that you've worked through and asking very simple questions. Are we on the right track? What matters most? What should come first? And that's that trade-off piece. And with that pre-engagement piece, we'll bring the context with us. So that narrative around that approach could centre around our financial strategy and the current operating environment. So rates pressure, constraints, trade-offs, because obviously better context equals better feedback. So we won't just be asking the questions, we'll kind of do some education at the same time, and that I guess aligns with our annual plan information campaign as well, or builds off the back of that. And everything we hear through this pre-engagement piece would be informing the development of the long-term plan towards the end of the year. So if we were to go down the route of pre-engagement, this slide shows what it could potentially look like. So I've broken it up into 4 phases to keep us disciplined and transparent and accountable to our engagement promise as well. Each of the key phases here would be underpinned by its own separate comms and engagement plan that falls out of the strategy. So phase 1, community conversations, that pre-engagement piece, that temperature check, we would potentially look to do that from the 1st of August through to the 31st, and it could potentially be framed as something similar to let's talk about tomorrow. Phase 2, we'd come back to you, September, October, this is what we heard. And that would be quite light touch. It would be informing you what our communities have told us in that pre-engagement piece, a lot of which you would be aware of because you would be contributing to that pre-engagement. And we would also go back to, not just you, but to our communities as well. Hey, look, this is what we've heard from you. It will be informing what we put into the LTP. Phase 3, formal consultation. So that would come early next year, March, have your say on our draft LTP. Following the adoption of the long-term plan, June 27, we would close the loop with our communities. We asked you this, you said this is where we've landed. Now, just to throw another spanner in the works as well, there is another option too. In fact, there's many options. You may remember when I last spoke with you, I tabled the idea of potentially bundling up pre-engagement with formal consultation required for the waters transition. It would be effectively piggybacking off that formal consultation in September. I have put a lot of thought into that, and my concern about that approach is that there is a real risk that one topic dominates over the other. So you've got 2 very, very complex topics. You've got the LTP and you've got the waters transition, of which, affect each other. And I have concerns that our communities will get completely confused and lost. But I do want you to keep that in mind as well. Regardless of what we do with pre-engagement or formal consultation, there are, as you know, a variety of tools that we will use. As I said, we will be where the people are, and this strategy focuses on designing engagement that that fits around everyday life, and doesn't just use traditional media, but really builds on, as I said, our elections campaign and our new ways of doing things. And also, that's not just digital. However, digital has been, as you know, a game changer for comms and engagement over the past few years. So it also means being out in our communities, being at pop-ups, at markets, at marae, at events. And internal is just as important as external. Alongside the strategy, we have developed an internal communication strategy as well, so that both our staff and yourselves will feel confident having our LTP conversations. So I feel like I'll leave it there. It's a lot of information to try and get your head around, and as I said, there are a few different options, but ultimately I really want some clear direction from you with regard to whether we want to go out with pre-engagement between now and Christmas, what that comms pathway may or may not look like, and also overall, how are we feeling about the overarching LTP communication strategy? Over to you.
Thank you, Liz. That was really good. Question from Andrew.
Thanks. I'm not sure whether it's to you, Liz, or more direct to the Mayor, but with amalgamation in the air, how relevant is an LTP to us as a single council?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think different councils have been grappling with how do we deal with this. And there's so much uncertainty. If we put in a Head Start proposal and it's accepted, we can expect to be in quite a different configuration at the next election. If we don't put one in, or if we put one in and it's not accepted, or it has some extended timelines around it, then this current council will still be in place at the next election, and then the following election things will be changed. Under that circumstance, even though the 10-year horizon of the LTP won't apply, it's that first 3 years in any case, which is kind of where we've got the most detail and the most accuracy in our projections. So, it seems to me, given the uncertainty, we probably do need to just proceed and continue to work up at least a thorough 3-year plan, even if the 10-year plan therefore has a little bit less focus because things might change so much.
Supplementary, on top of that too, with the rates capping that central government are enforcing, how's that going to be played out in this LTP? There's no mention of it, and again, that will have a pretty big say in the consultation process at all levels, won't it? So how does that one fit into what we're intending?
Thank you, Councillor Isles. It's something we're paying really close attention to. To your previous point, and I agree with everything that Mayor Nundle said, but this is going to be the most adaptive LTP. They always are, and we always say that, but I genuinely believe that this one, we need to be watching things so closely. We have to follow what we know, the legislation we have at the time, but Paul and I are working really closely with Steve in the background, particularly around that financial strategy and making sure that we're in the best possible position for if and when those rates caps do actually become law. There's really clear signals that whichever government is in the next term, that we think that is going to be a reality for councils. So we are being as mindful of that as we can possibly be in our strategic thinking that we will bring to you to test financial strategies coming shortly. July, yes, I thought so. Thank you.
Could I also add to that? I think that you're quite right, this is an important question in terms of the substance as we continue to go forward, but for now, if we can focus on the process of the communication strategy, I think would be helpful. Councillor Dennis.
I'll just add to that, I would have thought the 10-year plan was really important, even more this time than further, because you need to put down the long-term needs, projects and infrastructure requirements for this council, so that as we nominate them and join together with other councils, then they can be melded in together. So I actually think it's quite important. The rates capping is a whole other animal, but I think it's quite important that we keep going and do that sort of stuff.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's a very good point. Councillor Whittaker.
Thank you. My question's a bit along the same lines as my fellow councillor, because we've got 2 new bills coming through as well. We've got the new RMA and the planning bill. We could put a lot of work into this, and we're going to have to rejig it and rechange it. And I wonder, personally, I really think that that maybe councils or everywhere should delay it for a couple of years until those new bills come through, until we know what duties we're going to take over from the regional council. Because, I mean, you're going to put a lot of work in, then you're going to have to change it, alter it, a lot of time.
I guess I'll respond to that and say we're not the only ones going to be doing the work. It's your LTP, and we hope that you'll be doing it with us. But I do take the point that there is a concern that we'll do a heap of work and some of it will no longer be relevant if some of those changes do come to be. However, right now we have to do it. So we are legally bound to deliver an LTP by next year.
If I could just add to, we did raise that with DIA very early in the piece, that there is a lot of change and we may end up having to do amendments, but legally we still have to do it.
Yeah, legally we do, but central government or local government could put submissions into the central government to ask that they actually make this delay. I mean, we could use that as a remit going to the conference, LGA conference.
Councillor Emmink.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Liz, for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions. The first thing is on the timeline. I actually like the way you phrased it rather than what we read on there. At the June 27, when we asked, you said we did. Now, sometimes we ask, they said, and we don't do. So I think we just need to be careful about the language. You phrased it, this is where we landed. And I think that phrase kind of really takes into account all the feedback, all the knowledge that we've been presented to. If we come out with statements like we did that, they'll just say, well, what's the point of us participating? Yeah. The second thing is also about the timeline. It would have been good to see a timeline of where all our other engagements are. And you mentioned local water's done well, could potentially swamp if we were going out to pre-engagement. But is it possible that we can see a little bit of a line-up of where local water's done well is, where the Head Start reform stuff is? Because I don't know if we can make a decision today about the strategy as presented when there's actually quite a few other pieces of the puzzle that are playing. And of course, engagement fatigue and consultation. We've been confused about the rate and the speed that everything's coming at us. And for the example of the community meeting that we had this week talking about the Head Start program, it was really encouraging to see that the community weren't trying to fight council about the discussion. It was more about they could understand almost the unfairness that the central government is laying on us. And I just don't know whether they're going to think any sort of engagement is going to be worth it. And like Councillor Whitaker, it's just like, I think we have to be really careful with our staff's resources on how much we do when there's still so much unknown. But do you know offhand when the local water's done well engagement is and any of the other engagements, or will that just be a different slide you might be able to slip?
Yeah, well, I can definitely work with the strategy and policy team on pulling together a one-pager graphic for you. And I actually do recall at our last LTP, you were supplied with that. With regards to local water's done well, I understand that's September for consultation.
There's a few stages to that though, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
And that's what I mean, like trying to work in where the stages might fit in.
Yeah, we'll get that together and we'll circulate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you. Lizzie, last time we did an LTP, I thought that the engagement with the community was just ramped up incredibly. So I thought it was really good the way that we had people out there at the Awakari top school thing at the in different pods around the places. I think the pods, I don't know if it really worked that well. I know I spent hours at one without seeing people, but so the placements, but I think really good. Okay, and so I think we need to do the same. I think people were given every opportunity. I think the problem with this one is what everyone else is talking about. I think that now the comms team has got to do a huge amount of being able to start with, to present to the community saying, these are the challenges we face. Rates capping, amalgamations, the waters and all that sort of, so the people get a really good idea of the fact that we're trying to make a stunning meal out of mincemeat, really, because it's just fragmented all over the place. And I don't know how you're going to do it, but somehow there needs to be comms of saying that with all this and this is why we actually need to do this, is to try and form a basis of where we go from here to where we're going to go. So I think, as well as actually engaging with the people, we actually need to have that information. I don't know how you're going to do it. It needs to be, because we're confused, as Councillor Emmett said, is you need to actually have a presentable, simple thing to actually let people see how many variables we have to bring to the whole thing, really. But anyway, all good.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Jukes.
Thank you. Leslie has actually said what I had down to say, is that, so I don't feel I can answer your question about that the pre-engagement until I see what else we have in that same period, because I am a bit worried also with the resourcing and what it's going to do to the workload for yourself and the team. So if we could get that information coming back to us, we could probably give you a bit more of an informed decision on that. And your other question was, how are we feeling about the LTP Comms strategy? Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I like what I've seen. So congrats and well done. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson. Councillor James. Sorry, I keep getting that wrong.
Either or.
Thank you, Your Worship, Mayor Tanoa. My only, yes, it's good to get this thing out in the public, pre-engagement and all that. My only concern, though, is that a lot of the public aren't as involved in it as we are, and they might turn up for the pre-engagement, but they've lost interest by the time you get to the actual, where we want the actual info. Sometimes you can sort of overdo it a bit, so that would be my concern.
Councillor Hamill.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would be interested in thinking about whether we actually need to require any pre-engagement at all, because there's so much uncertainty, and echoing other people's concerns about perhaps consultation fatigue. Most of the community don't know what an LTP is, don't really care. They have specific things that they're focused on, and I think the reform, other issues are going to take over. I know we need to do some consultation, but what would it look like if we did no pre-engagement specifically on LTP?
What would it look like? I think there is enough community narrative at the moment that is giving us information that we can feed into the LTP. And as I said in my presentation as well, this strategy rides on the coattails of all of the community feedback that we've heard over the past few years as well. It's not starting from scratch. So any consultation we've done over the past, let's say 5-10 years, it's all feeding into this. I think also, whilst we might decide not to do pre-engagement, there are light touch options that you could do as well. It might just be continuing the likes of the annual plan information campaign throughout the end of the year, and using that as a way to get informal feedback from our community, just by the likes of digital comments, etc., on social media. So there are little ways that we can still feed into the LTP without doing a full pre-engagement approach.
May I just jump on and add to that? I think it's a really good question because we've been asking a similar one at some of the project planning groups. I think given the direction we heard in terms of the strategic framework and the fact that at the moment it seems, and we hope to confirm this with you shortly, that the strategic high-level framework, the vision, the community outcomes and the priority areas are essentially remaining very similar with just those 4 specific focus areas. We're not sure it really warrants a widespread pre-engagement. If the LTP was having a real shake-up and that this council was deciding actually we're not going to hold to any of those former priorities, we want to go off over here, then absolutely we'd be recommending, much deeper pre-engagement at this stage.
Thank you. I guess what I'm hearing, and I kind of agree as well, is acknowledging this is not a decision-making forum, but just kind of putting some thoughts out and giving a sense of where we're thinking. I kind of agree with the approach of more of a light touch approach, based more on information than seeking information as a pre-consultation stage, so that the community is more, because there is so much going on and people, and we talked about, people would get confused with the local Water's Done Well and stuff, but I think they're going to be confused anyway, or at least focus on the things that are top of mind for them, which may not be specifically LTP stuff. So I think putting as much information out as is reasonable, giving people clarity around what are the different things that are going on, I think would be really helpful. Similarly to others concerned about the consultation engagement, and I agree with Councillor James as well that sometimes people come to a pre-engagement thing and then they said their piece, so that's them, and then how that comes through when we do the formal engagement, because, so I think I'm agreeing with what I'm sensing as the general mood around the council table. Yeah. Councillor Isles.
Yeah, inclined to agree with what you're saying. Just looking at the next presentation that we're going to be having, though, with regards to Three Waters, there's going to be some hell of a lot of changes come about through potable water, wastewater, etc., which is going to impact the ratepayer big time. So, that in itself is something that really is going to have to be consulted on.
Yeah. And I think that's quite right, and that's part of the thing about having a light touch with the LTP, is because we got these other things which we're going to have some pretty hard decisions to be made end of this year and into next year. So focusing our consultation around those things Cool. Is that enough of what you need from today?
Yes, thank you very much, and I will work, as I said, with the strategy and policy team on putting together a bit of a timeline graphic for you as well and have that circulated.
Cool, thank you. And just to say before you leave, I think the comms team does a really great job, so I just want to mihi to you for the awesome work you and your team do. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
No, I agree with Nando. You're doing a great job. The comms coming out of District Council, lots of comments from our people are saying the comms are very, very good. Thank you for that. I'd like to see the light touch. I mean, our people need to understand the challenges that are in front of us, that are coming, be it LTP and annual plan, so they have an idea. Because I've got a board meeting next week with the Rino, and I will be communicating with them. LTP is coming, but here are the challenges that are in front of us. Local waters, the SLG, all that stuff, reforms, understand that, and we'll try and get our comms out to you guys to the best of our ability. But just to say they are happy with the comms that have been coming out. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up on the agenda is the Three Waters rating review. Invite Nick to the table. Welcome, Nick.
Morena tātou. We've got half of the second half of the third part of the team just coming to join us. Co-presenting this paper or proposal is Caron and Paul Davidson. I think we'll have a few things to say about this as well. So this is about water charging or water rating, and under the central government initiative with local water done well, we are taking water services through a number of changes, as you're well aware and has been referenced already this morning. As you know, we're establishing a ring-fenced in-house business unit by the 1st of July next year. We're also investigating the potential benefits of a multi-council CCO, and those initiatives are in essence about how we deliver the services. What we are taking to you today is an initiative about how we charge for those services, which is obviously a very important part of water services going forward. This kicked off under the previous council, and many of you were involved in a number of workshops and developing this towards a paper that was put to you in August last year. And the point of this briefing is to reconfirm with this council that the direction by the previous council is endorsed before we actually put a plan together and put a paper to you for approval of how we implement this in late July, I think that's coming up. So in August last year, Council approved some changes to the water charges. It also approved for us to do a review of how we charge for water, wastewater and stormwater. And the point of that review would be to look at harmonisation of water rates. In essence, people paying an amount for a level of service, not necessarily totally depending on where you live. And if we can just focus on that was just sort of an introductory piece, and if we can click to the next slide, please. Oh, I see.
Can you just repeat what you just said, please? Focusing on, could you just go back to that? Focusing on the level of service, not where you live. Or could you just explain that a bit more for me?
Yeah, so there are differences in how water services are charged for the amount that is charged depending on where you live. So it's not quite a cost to serve, but depending on the cost of producing the water and wastewater, and actually particularly stormwater services as well, there's a specific rate depending on that cost to serve. And yeah, the intent is to then lessen the impact of where you live and where you draw your water from to the cost, and harmonise that across the district. That's not to say that we would do that at the flick of a switch. This would be potentially how we put the plan together, and depending on feedback from you over a period of time. And any other questions? Interestingly, the three of us here are newer to this than most of the people around the table. But just to go through the bullets there to set the scene, water charging is a key component of the ring fencing for water services. As you know, Waters will have to pay for Waters. None of the revenue from it will go to anything else, but also what is invested in Waters can't be drawn from any other sources but the charges for the water. And that's required for implementation by the 1st of July 27, which is the time by which we start the internal business unit. And like I've said before, the previous council endorsed a review in 2025. And next step is for we intend to put to you in July, late July, what an implementation plan for that would look like. And there'll be some options around that, not necessarily just a straight down the line implementation of it, but sort of an introduction over time. So this discussion is to check that you are aligned with that direction, or if you have anything in particular that you want for us to look into or cover when we put the plan to you. If you have any concerns around that, now's a good time to let us know so that we can cover that in our research and putting the plan together. Want to click through that?
Good morning, councillors. As Nick has said, we started looking at the current rating system last year, and it has not been fully reviewed for some time, 2014. So this is quite a big piece of work to undertake to review how we rate all our components, including Three Waters. And of course, under Local Water Done Well, the review is required to ensure that our current rates are fit for purpose and that what we charge is what we collect. And at the moment, it would be fair to say that we're not recovering our full cost of waters. And as Nick also said, last year you were presented with an options paper around some of this information, and this was consistent with our revenue and financing policy and our financial strategy. So the policy and the strategy will obviously have to be reworked to accommodate this piece of work. In the revenue and financing policy, that's quite a complex document that outlines the needs of the community and how things are determined. And likewise, we have, in the paper, it highlights that we have generally harmonised the water and wastewater, but there is still a lot of work to do in the Plains and Murupara and other areas within waters. So we are bringing back to the table this piece of work that was started with the previous council and is required to be looked at really for as part of the LTP review and the Local Water Done Well reform, and probably other reforms that might come into play.
Excuse me, could you just bring the microphone closer to you, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
So the water review considers the implication of harmonising all three water activities, so you'll get a comprehensive pros and cons because there are negatives and positives for us as a provider, but also for the customers depending on where they live and how that will impact them. So that's obviously an important consideration for the decision making. And it is. I mean, we might as well be blunt about this. There will be a lot of opinion about these changes in the community as well, and obviously that needs to be taken into consideration, which is also why this should be done in step with the LTP and the consultation of the LTP. Yeah, that pretty much covers the points, I think. So the last point as well, actually, around the CCO considerations, where we talk about the cost to serve, and of course the CCO conversation is about cost to serve, not necessarily just for Whakatane and its users, but cost to serve for our partnering or potential partner districts as well. So this harmonisation conversation and the cost to serve conversation will be quite prominent in these conversations in the CCO investigation as well.
Thank you, Nandro. Nick, just going back to Murupara, how far down the track are we there with that wastewater in particular issue?
Well, it's going through a co-design and consenting process, and in the Water Services delivery plan, the delivery of that is pushed beyond the 10-year horizon. But we're investigating options for how we could have a more resilient and up-to-date plant for Murupara.
Just to supplementary that one, along with their, potable water, which they're also talking that there's a possibility that could be relocated, I think, within the system. Is that still a possibility, or has that been?
Yeah, that's right. So there's investigations for that one and Ruatoki. Yep.
So again, that could be quite an impact on their rates, right?
Without harmonisation, that's correct. And I guess even with harmonisation, because they are such big investments that whatever we do, we will pay more for waters. There's no two ways about it. And we see that right across the country with the establishment of CCOs that are looking into this, and our modelling shows us that we're not going to pay much less than double for our water services in a decade, and that's just a fact of the matter. And the investigations we are doing now is about how we can minimise those costs and get as great a value for money as possible for our consumers.
Thank you.
Deputy Magics.
Thank you. Just a question for Paul. I'm not sure how well you might be able to answer this, but tell me what you can. What is the gap between what we are charging and what we would be needing to be charging? Because I think you said that we weren't charging enough for our water services. So, as generalised as you can give it.
I think it's more a question of, from a harmonisation perspective, we've got a considerable difference across the district in terms of what charging is. And when we look at the rates resolution tomorrow, you'll see that there are a lot lower charges in some communities to others. Now, that, as Nick pointed out, that might be because there's a different level of service. So we are covering the cost of waters. It's just the distribution of the cost is in such that there are different. It's not the same payment for the same level of service across the community, and that's what I think the decision back in August last year from the previous council was. We accept the fact that harmonisation needs to happen, particularly when we're talking about future investment, because that will assist in the fairness and equity of those payments. What we're seeking, not a decision today, but pure future paper and a direction is we will continue with that harmonisation, and that will roll through as we, if we move to a CCO, for example, in terms of that pricing model, and then. What will bring to you in July is the commencement of what that phasing program will look like, because we may not be able to do it in a year. It might take several years because we want to work with the community to be able to make those decisions equitably. So yeah.
Excellent. No, thanks. That's great.
Councillor O'Brien?
Yeah, I think what was handy and what happened with us, the last council was affected, what helped us was, okay, if we harmonise, and if we don't, here's what it's going to cost the Murupara residents if we don't, if they're targeted. And if we don't help them and we don't harmonise, that's what's going to cost them. But here's what it's going to cost you as the Te Tiko residents if we do harmonise. And that's what the people need to understand, or would like to hear, and that's what they'd like to understand. And that's what I'd like to be able to convey to them, so they understand, okay, this is what it's going to cost us, but it's going to enable the Murupara community and or the Marata community to because they'll never be able to afford it on their own. And that's the communications I'd like to have with my people. They were handy the last time they gave us those figures.
Absolutely, and when we do the long-term plan, because we'll actually have the updated numbers of what those investments look like, we'll be able to rerun those pricing models and you'll be able to see what harmonised versus not harmonised looks like. And you're absolutely right, particularly the smaller communities, becomes very difficult to pay for those large investments. And therefore, they're the options that we need to think about through that process.
Somewhat supplementary to Deputy Mayor's question, the way I understand it is that currently people get a water rate that's based on the amount of water that they use, the potable water, but the wastewater and stormwater charges are wrapped up in the general rate. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can be via a targeted rate, but they aren't volumetric and they're charged on a general rate basis effectively, even though they may be classified as a targeted rate.
Right,
But that's...
Wastewater's classified as a target.
Yeah, wastewater is...
And stormwater particularly, yes.
Yeah. So, because I guess where that takes me is most people probably don't understand how much they're paying for water services for all three waters. In terms of the ring fencing that's required under the new water legislation, will that continue, or does that require that charging to be more transparent for people?
It's a really good question, and we're still working through the regulations that are coming out from Commerce Commission, but the end result needs to be the revenue needs to be ring-fenced. It's not as clear as to whether the invoicing needs to be completely separated, but we are taking the approach to look to separate that invoicing as well, just to make it really transparent on it. As I understand it at the moment, we're still working through this, but most of our revenue is separated out now. There is a small amount of stormwater that sits in the general rate, but it is a small amount, so that will be picked up over the next financial year. But yeah, we've taken the approach to look to separate invoicing as well, just for that clarity, so you can very clearly see what the rate is, and that will form part of the ring fencing. Yeah.
I think that's a good thing in terms of transparency for the community, but it'll be a shock for people because it'll look like they're suddenly being charged a whole lot more when actually it's not a new cost, it's just presented in a different way. So I think the communication around that needs to be very carefully done. Councillor Hamill.
Thank you. I'm just reading the report from August 2025, and I just wanted to check what not everybody currently has metered connections, I think, for a volumetric check. So do we need to get that all in line? We need to have 100% of our households or properties metered for volumetric measurements before we transition?
No, we don't. But we have a plan to roll this out, but it's not a necessity. We can still charge for a connection and have an annual rate for a water connection and what they draw, rather than charge. But ultimately, a user pay system with a meter is what we're aiming for.
I think David might correct me. I think we're about 85% metered. Is that?
I think it's 85 that are charged through meters, and there's actually another 10% that have a meter but not charged.
Yeah, we have about
Yeah.
5 or 10%, 5 or 10% are metered but not charged.
Just to add to Nick's though, to achieve full harmonisation, it should be 100% metered, because otherwise it's hard, you're not measuring the volume of those other
Yeah, that's right. So is it a
properties.
loose
So
end?
it can absolutely be done, but it just, arguably, it's not measured on the same basis, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Nandor. Just going back to the metering, I recall, 3-4 years ago when the meters were installed through Taniata and Waimana, and you had some residents that totally opposed and said, no way are you installing a meter. We do have not a large number, but we do have them. So how do they come into are they going to be rated if this all comes to being at the higher rate, if they're not metered? Or do we enforce it?
Just like we do today, we for the ones that aren't metered, we charge a connection rate, basically, an annual rate of a number of hundreds of dollars. I can't remember from the top of my head, but that you pay just for the you pay for the
Connection.
fixed cost and volume. Well, it's not volumetric, but for the volume you use in the one fixed charge.
But without a meter, you're not going to be aware of those connections on the smaller.
No, that's right, and that's why we're kind of chipping away and trying to minimise their impact on the harmonisation, of course. But it also has an impact on the usage, right? Because if you are charged, we know that there's very strong evidence to prove that when you introduce a volumetric charge, people do come much more aware of how much water they use.
Yeah, but if you haven't got that meter installed, you're still going to avoid that, aren't you? And I mean, out in Waimana for the last week, there's been our water people have been out there reading meters, and when I asked them as to what was the purpose, they said, well, just checking to see what the usage is. If you ain't got a meter, though.
For where there are meters but not charged, is that what?
No, you've got residents in Waimana and Taniata that refuse to have the meters installed. So again, if we do come into the volumetric charging, those people, how are they going to be charged? I mean, I'm quite a big consumer of water because of my gardens and livestock and what have you, but somebody across the road who says, no, I'm not having a meter, possibly could be using a hell of a lot more water than I am, but he's refused to have a meter installed.
Yeah, I'm sort of, well, not unaware of this situation, but from a council's perspective, I would have thought that you can't just say, no, I don't want a meter. Like, it's our prerogative to install them.
There's a fair few that have said, no way, you're not coming on my property, I'm not having a meter installed.
Look, it's certainly a conversation we need to have, and it's always, those that use a lot of, you're absolutely right, there's winners and losers with water metering. Without it, it's an average, and that's the conversation we need to have with the community.
And of course, in Waimana, those meters are on the private property, they're not on the actual roadside.
Oh, I see. Yep, okay.
I think there's some people have an ideological concern about metering, and particularly being a prelude to privatisation, I think is a common concern. Yeah. But I think if people understand actually volumetric charging offers them the opportunity to reduce their costs, because you can actually, there's quite simple ways you can reduce your water use and bring your costs down, right?
Agree, Nandor, but this is the question that was being asked when we were installing the meters some years ago. We told the ratepayers that they were being installed so that we could actually monitor leakages, and it was amazing how many leakages actually came out of the network when they were installing these meters, whether it had been under houses that had been traditionally having leaks for yonks. But as I said, there was a small sector who said, no way, Jose, are you putting a meter on my water supply?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that? I would assume that for the whole of Waimana, there would be, in Zaitane, there'd be a separate water meter saying how much is going towards that town. So you would then take off all the ones that are water metered, and you'd have a bit left that hasn't been water metered, and you divide that between the ones that refuse to have a water meter, and you'd still be able to charge volumetrically.
All right. Moving on.
All right, thank you. So we take that as a yes, go ahead and bring us a plan for the implementation of this with some options. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. All right, councillors, let's take the opportunity for a tea break and be back at 25 past. Kia ora tātou, welcome back to our briefing, 24th of June 2026. We'll reconvene the briefing. Gentlemen? We'll reconvene the briefing with the report on simplifying local government Head Start pathway. Welcome to the table, Walt, M and Kay.
Kia ora councillors. So this is our first briefing on the simplifying local government reform. I think we've touched on this already this morning. It seems to be woven through everything that we're doing. So it'll be a bit of a tag team effort today. I think Steve's online. I think Mayor Nando as well will be covering a couple of bits and pieces. Obviously you know Walt, who's been doing the lion's share of the work, and Kay as well, who will give you a bit of a summary of some of the online feedback that we received. Yeah, you. Yeah, no, you can.
So just really briefly, a reminder of the timeline. We're obviously up against it with a proposal being required by 9th of August. At our last council meeting, we worked through confirming, I guess, a commitment to at least exploring the pathway, and so that's brought us to today. So what I'd like to do first off is, over the first few slides, is summarise a series of options for whakatane, and we touched on what those options might look like in that initial paper to council last week. Was it last week? And also at that meeting, a fourth option was briefly discussed, which was around the inclusion of areas in the Western Bay of Plenty district. So the four options that we'll run over, and I have to say it's quite light analysis given the timeframes we've got. You know, there's only so deep that we can scratch, but what we do want to do is try to provide a fair analysis of the options that are realistically available to us. So the four options are the Eastern Bay of Plenty aggregation, the Eastern Bay of Plenty plus Rotorua, the full Bay of Plenty, and the one that was raised last week was around some connection to the Western Bay of Plenty in respect of some of the water catchments that flow that way. So we'll start with the first one, being the Eastern Bay of Plenty aggregation. So this would include Kawerau, Opotiki and Whakatane district councils, and of course the requirement as a unitary authority would also carry the responsibilities and functions of the regional council at that level. The size of the land is 7,950 square kilometres, so it's quite a big area that makes up, if we look at it by portion of our region, we're over 60% of our region. What it doesn't include there is the coastal marine area. So of course, you know, if we're carrying regional council functions as well, there's a responsibility for coastal marine area out to 12 nautical miles as well. So that's just land. The Māori population in our area, 52.3%. So that's quite high relative to other parts of our region, and 10 iwi that would be represented in that area. So of interest, this is quite close to the statistics for Gisborne, which is a unitary authority very close to us. Their area is 8,300 square kilometres, so that's quite close to ours. Their population is about 52,000 people, so that is quite close to this. Their Māori population makes up 55% of their population, again, quite close to ours. They're already a unitary authority, and as I understand it, they're not exploring anything more or less than what they currently are, and they don't have to under the policy. So I guess what it's just saying is that, you know, there's a satisfaction with the scale that they're at, and so this should, you know, we should consider Eastern Bay of Plenty as a realistic scale also in comparison to that.
Question from Leslie.
Oh, sorry.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Walton, Em and Kay. Are we allowed to ask questions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just the question that I have there, just probably on the positive side, is it worth noting what the population growth of our three communities has been as a trend over the last 10 years? Just think if we're going to submit something and we can demonstrate growth, that might add a little bit of weight if they're tossing things up.
Yes, thank you.
And then just in further comparison to a number of other unitaries across New Zealand, there are 6 unitary authorities that already exist in New Zealand. Gisborne, as we've mentioned. Marlborough is another one that's very comparable to, well, both Marlborough and Tasman actually are both very comparable in size and scale and population to this Eastern Bay option. The difference being is that they have a very low portion of their population that's Māori, but in terms of land area and population, they're very comparable as well. The 3 that aren't necessarily comparable are, of course, the most recent one being Auckland City, 1.6 million people. Nelson City is actually a unitary authority at 54,000 people, and Chatham Island. So we've got 3 there that aren't really comparable to what we're talking about, but we've got 3 others that are very comparable to this scale. So just picking on a few of the potential opportunities and advantages to the east. I mean, the biggest one would be mitigating the risk of decision-making being dominated by the bigger constituency that's based in the west. It supports the established Eastern Bay Plenty communities of interest, so you know the identity people have, where they work, where they access services, where they play their sports, that kind of thing. There's a potential for stronger iwi partnerships and influence because it's a smaller geography. So what I'm talking about there's 10 iwi represented across that area. Once we look out to the broader region, there's over 30 iwi that are represented in that area. And for one entity to hold the relationship across those iwi, whether there might be challenges associated with that.
I'll just pause you for a second. Well, I know Councillor James has got a question. I'm just thinking maybe we should go through the slide and then do questions at the end so that we can all, well, yeah, it might be the easiest structured way to go through.
This model would leverage the inter-council trust and relationships that we have. There's numerous processes that we've worked across at the Eastern Bay scale. It would provide a relationship that's Eastern Bay specific with central government through that unitary authority. So, you know, if we were to broaden that, say, to the whole Bay of Plenty region, there's potentially a stronger relationship with central government because of the scale of what that region is. But on the other hand, it's not Eastern Bay of Plenty centric. So, you know, there's a risk of kind of losing that Eastern Bay focus in that relationship. When we're looking at a smaller scale, we're looking at having being closer to communities, which potentially provides more responsiveness. You know, strategy is closer to delivery, that sort of thing. There's a stronger opportunity for placemaking, for localism, and a couple of other things that I didn't necessarily mention in those bullet points. I mean, this thinking is just continuing to evolve as we're more and more working through the process. But I think at this scale, there's also the best limitation of risk in terms of economic leakage. So if I think back to what I'm talking about, there is, if some of you might recall, when Bay Plenty Regional Council was looking at essentially moving their headquarters from Whakatane and taking it to Tauranga, and there was risk that would take jobs with it, that would take contracts, that would take procurement, would take partners' jobs, and then there's the flow and impact of those, you know, salaries and economic flow through other businesses in the economy as well. So that's just another opportunity of staying at the most local scale that we can. And it provides assurance for our smaller partners in this model. Of course, we see risks when we look to the west or even towards Rotorua with the larger population base that they have there. Our smaller partners will equally feel that risk, I'm sure, even looking at Whakatane. But certainly if they're looking larger than that partnership with Whakatane, that risk becomes even more real for them as smaller partners. Potential challenges sort of comes into 2 categories. One is possible disadvantages of being the smallest option. I mean, it is still an aggregation. We're still coming together as councils, but it is the smallest of the options. And then the other one is the possible need and complexity that comes with cross-boundary collaboration. So the smallest options, there's more limitations, I guess, in terms of leveraging economies of scale. and that's just based purely off an assumption that the larger you go, the more economies of scale there are. That would obviously need to be tested, and we've seen through, over the last few years, the development of the Three Waters and the exploration of the Three Waters models, that economies of scale weren't necessarily as obvious as we thought they might be. And if I'm remembering rightly, even looking out 10 years, there wasn't necessarily a very strong case in terms of economies of scale. So certainly that's something that would have to be attested. But I'm just making the assumption here that the larger you go, the greater potential there is for economies of scale. It's the smallest option for rating base, and I guess for financial resilience that might come with having a smaller rating base and a smaller revenue base to deal with the infrastructure investment that we might need, or financial resilience or shock, for example. That being said, and I'm just always trying to think of what's the argument and what's the counter-argument. There's always kind of that legacy financial situation that councils are bringing with them, right? So, again, Kawerau and Pōtiki are probably looking to Whakatane and going, well, you guys have got a lot more debt than us. Their debt per household is very, very low. But similarly, if we look to Rotorua and to Tauranga, their debt is quite a lot higher per household than us. And on top of that, obviously, they've got a lot more households. So collectively, that's a lot more debt that would need to be kind of considered in terms of any coming together. Other cross-boundaries considerations might be the consideration of natural systems. So natural systems are obviously a lot larger than district boundaries. Thinking about catchments, but I'm also thinking about coastal environmental systems that regional council functions currently capture, and that would have to be passed on to these new unitary councils. That being said, even in the case of the Auckland City merger, water catchments straddle boundaries, and there are cross-boundary relationships and collaboration that they have to go through to manage those. So they've got a relationship with Northland Region, for example, with the Kaipara Harbour management, with Waikato Region for the Lower Waikato River management. So there's just a couple of examples of working across those borders. The quayside complexity would have to be worked through, obviously. And the other one, and I'm not sure, there's not a lot of coherency between reforms, but the direction of our Three Waters travel is, potentially towards Rotorua. And this is then, I guess, inconsistent with that, whether that has implications or not. So that's option one.
Thank you. Councillor James?
Well, it was actually only an inquisitive inquiry, really, but there were 6 unitary councils set up originally, and how did that come about? And what's made me sort of think about it is you've got 3, Tasman, Nelson and Marlborough. Why were they all set up separately? Was there an option to do it at the time, or?
Yeah, personally, I'm not actually familiar with the background behind that. Those ones did actually happen after the 1989 reorganisation, whereas Gisborne was actually formed during and as part of the 1989. So their district and regional boundaries were so closely matched that they formed those as a unitary at that time. Those 3 that you just mentioned were after that the reorganisation, and since we're restructured again. The reason I'm not sure, but perhaps. Yeah. And of course, Auckland, we know more recently.
Just a couple of comments more than questions, but just the first thing is it's really helpful to understand the comparative with other unitaries that exist. So thank you very much for that. I think that was a really useful piece of information. I think, there is some interest in our community around an eastern-based sub-regional unitary, and I think the real question for us is then, if we did go that way, how do we deliver those still regional functions? And I think that needs a great deal of thought if we want to pursue down this way, because there's a few different ways of coming at it, and what's in and what's out. Just to make the comment that you referred to the scale efficiencies of the potential water CCO, and I think what we've learned from there is there are some and this will come before council, but there are some benefits, but they kind of really only show up after about 10 years. For the first 10 years, it's pretty marginal. But there are benefits further out. And just the other comment I was going to make, a comment and a question. Comment around the debt. One of the options that's been put up where different councils have different levels of debt is that those could be kind of ring-fenced in a new entity and target rated to those areas. So there are ways of handling different legacy debt levels. And my question is around, because I've kind of asked this in a few different places. I haven't really got an answer that is clear, that makes it clear to me. My understanding is that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council divides up its catchment work into 3 sub-regional areas in any case, Eastern Bay, Rotorua and Western Bay essentially. But we talk about the importance of catchment management at a regional level. And so I've been trying to understand is that simply because, and you may or may not have the answer, but is that simply because they retain the expertise in one unit that then gets applied to different sub-regions? Is it to do with a funding cross-subsidisation thing, or are there other things that I'm not aware of? Do you have an answer to that?
I don't. It's not my area of expertise. I did work for regional council many, many moons ago, but even then, not in that space. A couple of observations would be that the catchments, there is some level of alignment to kind of the sub-regions, but there are broader catchments. We do have some information available if it's a good time to share it, or if it's useful. Yeah. I guess around management, ensuring that what happens upstream has an impact downstream would be my only real thought on the continuity of catchment management. As I mentioned, Auckland have arrangements to manage across boundaries, so it is navigable.
Oh yeah, thank you for that, that's helpful. All right, yeah, thank you, Will. No other questions before we move on? Councillor Dennis and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Just this pamphlet that's just been handed out, the Tauranga Moana, is that quite a big catchment area, is it? So if we were to just do the Eastern Bay and take the Kaituna and Waihi Estuary with us, that would still mean that whoever has Tauranga would have to do their own catchment thing, because that looks like quite a big catchment area. So so it's like there's no benefit to saying we want the Kaituna so we can all be done from one posse. So in the talks you've had so far with other areas and ours, would you be looking at setting up a CCTO to do the catchment stuff that Regional Council does now?
So as part of our Head Start proposal, even though it's, as they call it, a high-level, light-touch strategic outline proposal, we do have to start to identify how we'll manage functions that are beyond the district, or region-wide functions, or even catchment functions. And that might be through, without any detail, it might be through terms of reference, or an MOU, or joint committee, or a regional committee, or regional entity, or CCO, or shared service. We just have to outline how we deliver them. In the next phase, then, we'd have to get into real detail about, actually how we would deliver them. I suppose what I want to stress is that there's been quite a strong narrative from the DIA that don't get too hung up on that how do you just manage everything within your district. There are going to be things that there currently are. The purpose of showing you this is actually when you get into catchments, it's quite a minefield. It's going to be difficult for everyone to get everything they need out of it. So I wouldn't be too hung up on making sure that everything that you manage is within your district. There will be things on the margins.
And Deputy Mayor?
Oh, no, my question was actually similar. It was just because it wasn't quite clear in my mind how much detail in that proposal we had to have in regards to whether it was going to be a CCO for the regional council functions or whether it was in-house. But I think you probably have covered that with what you answered for Gavin, so thanks.
Councillor Hamill.
Thanks, Walter. My question is about if this Eastern Bay differs from the proposed water CCO option, how challenging would that be? Whether that eventuates or not is another matter, but if we did do our water with Rotorua, how challenging would that be as an organisation or as an entity to have an Eastern Bay for general council functions or regional council functions, and then the water CCO with the different regions? Would that be at a different layer of complexity, or could it be quite manageable?
I'm not really sure the answer to that, but the one observation that would jump out for me is simply the difference or the relationship between catchment management and noise management.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the relationship there predominantly that would have to be managed.
Yeah.
I think it's probably fair to say at this stage it's going to be more complicated. It will be more complex. I don't know the level of that, but it's fair to assume it would be more.
I think if I can make a comment, I mean, at the moment, without any amalgamation, you're talking about a CCO that delivers services across 4 different council areas. If we went with this kind of approach, it would be, and the CCO with Rotorua continued in as it's kind of currently envisaged, you'd have 2 council areas. So I'm not sure that it is a lot more complex than what it would currently be in any case. Yeah.
Great, shall I move on to the next option? The next options I'll cover probably a little bit more briefly because the concepts hopefully we're a little bit more familiar with. So option 2 now includes Rotorua District alongside the Eastern Bay of Plenty. The additional land area is 2,600 kilometres, so it adds an extra 28% over and above what was already there. Interestingly, in terms of population, it adds another 138% over and above, so it more than doubles the population base that we have in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and I guess that touches on part of the risk of, that kind of local voice, loss of local voice to the larger urban centre, in the same way that we see that risk to the west. At this point, it's probably worth just pointing out that in these models, we're looking at territorial local authority boundaries. The regional boundaries work slightly differently, matching those catchments that we just mentioned. So about 40% of Rotorua Lakes Council actually doesn't sit in Bay of Plenty region. It sits in the Waikato region because that catchment runs down to the Waikato River. And then to the southern point of Whakatane district, there's about 14% of the Taupō district, which is actually part of the Bay of Plenty region as well, because that feeds part of the Rangataiki catchment. So there is lots of complexity when you're looking at catchments versus communities of interest versus, how do economies work, where's the connection of people to work, how is infrastructure shared between different regions, Tauranga City and Western Bay in particular, regional deals, things like that. There's actually a lot of different considerations, and you could map things out and build a case in a lot of different ways. So with the Rotorua option, as we go larger, there is, opportunity on that assumption of economies of scale. The bigger you go, the more opportunities are to potentially realise. Again, as Mayor's pointed out, it takes some time to realise those gains. There's potential for larger organisational capacity and specialist capacity be held once you have a larger organisation. That potential for stronger link into central government in terms of your influence, but again, this wouldn't be Eastern Bay of Plenty centric within this model. It has alignment to the Three Waters, direction of travel. It enables the Tarawera River catchment to flow from Lake Tarawera, which is within Rotorua, through Kawerau and through to our coast. And there are some iwi rohe that have cross boundaries into Rotorua and Whakatane district and Kawerau, so there are some benefits in that space as well. Potential challenges are, the larger we go, that increased dilution of Eastern Bay of Plenty voice, that increased dilution of iwi connection. We've gone now at the bottom of that box in the bottom left-hand corner there, you can see we've gone from 10 iwi to 21 iwi to hold a relationship with and a partnership with. The catchment of Tarawera River is connected, but the catchment of Kaituna River down into the west is still disconnected, so it doesn't necessarily resolve that one. It still carries the risk and complexity of quayside, of working through that. And like with the EBOP option, although you're aggregating some councils, you're still looking to disaggregate some regional functions, so it doesn't quite resolve that one either. And that's option 2.
Questions, comments, councillors? Councillor Whittaker?
I have a question. I probably should have asked it of Nick when he was here. Rotorua, is it all metered now, all their households? Because once upon a time they were never metered. And so their use of water was a lot larger than anyone else. And there are ongoing problems. No?
I'm not sure. We could find out. I'm not sure. Sorry, Councillor.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's the issue is, if we go with them with 3 waters, so to speak, there's almost a slight sort of disconnect, I think, if they're not metered, because they had problems in the past, and I'm going back sort of 15 years, they had problems with their wastewater disposal, used to go up into the forest, it came back down through one of the streams back into Lake Rotorua, and so they had a high nitrogen and phosphorus content in the water, which they had to mitigate. So that's one of the issues, you know.
Thank you, Councillor. I think I'd invite you to, we'll be coming back with a discussion around the local waters done well and the potential CCO, so I think that'll be the right time for those questions because you'll have the right people in the room for that. Other, looks like us, we can move on. Thank you.
Actually, I do have a little bit of information here on this, for some reason, on my notes on this particular slide, but the debt per household, this is, I'm not sure the science behind this, it comes from the New Zealand Taxpayers Union website. They do benchmark councils on there, but we range from Kawerau at 2.1 thousand debt per household in that district through to Tauranga is the highest at 23,000 debt per household. So there's quite a range within our region. Whakatane district seems to be sitting in the middle at about 12,000 per household, but certainly the councils to the east are holding far lower debt per household compared to those west ones, but potentially resolvable and mitigatable through that targeted rate. So there are always options. Option 3, so this is the full Bay of Plenty region, so including all the TAs of the region. Just for clarity, in terms of that boundary point I made just before, it does include the full Rotorua district and doesn't include that portion of the Taupo district in this analysis. So this is the maximum scale to leverage potential efficiency gains. It's the maximum scale for rating base. It's the maximum scale for financial resilience. Again, we have to be mindful of the kind of inherited financial situation that comes with that. It's probably the strongest national influence that we can have in terms of the relationship with central government, but again, not Eastern Bay of Plenty centric. It doesn't require regional council functions to disaggregate in the way that the other options do. On the other hand, it does require all those territorial or local authorities to come together, and there's complexity potentially with that in terms of different systems and processes. So, you know, you half a dozen the one, half a dozen the other. It doesn't offer quite as many cross-boundary complexity issues because we stay as a whole region, and the quayside stays within the region as well. In terms of challenges, there's obviously the potential for reduced local voice and place-based responsiveness because decisions are more centralised, and potentially one could easily expect that they would be centralised to the larger urban centres. There's obviously the potential for reduced iwi voice as well through a much larger geography. We're now looking at 32 iwi rather than the initial 10. If we want to ensure, and I'm sure we would, ensure place for local democracy, for localism, for placemaking, then we're adding the complexity layer of a whole bunch of additional governance arrangements that would need to be considered. And that would be probably the most complex of the potential governance models for the options we put forward. There's the potential for, I guess, our priorities to be overshadowed by those of those bigger urban centres, particularly the growth pressures in the west we're all conscious of, and the inequitable investment that might go that way because it is the largest population centre. They also, obviously, across the region, we have very different priorities, challenges and opportunities that we're working through, what we're looking to progress and the priorities that we're facing in our area. There's a lot more similarity across the east aggregation than there might be once we start going wider than that. And then, I guess, picking up on that additional point I made on the first slide, it's the greatest risk for economic leaking into or out of this region. So as soon as, I mean, if you're thinking about economies of scale is about, efficiency, but it's also probably about roles. And, if those roles, like with the regional council argument a decade and a half ago, are looking to be located elsewhere and contracts elsewhere, then that has employment ramifications, it has contract ramifications and spend ramifications for our local area. So that's just another consideration. So that's option 3.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Whittaker.
Thanks, Walter. Did you look at another option, and which I did mention before about splitting Te Puke out of Western Bay? And I know central government probably doesn't like the idea of redrawing boundaries, but to me that makes the more sensible option because it brings the Kaituna catchment into the Eastern Bay, and you could base water services here for all the catchment management of the river and drainage schemes, etc., plus land care. Did you look at that option?
That's the very next slide, councillor. Oh, yep. That's all good. We'll get there next.
Councillor Hamill.
No. Excuse me. In this slide, you've got Rotorua in there. Whereas, my suggestion was without Rotorua.
Councillor Hamill.
Bit of blue sky thinking. If we did do a full regional amalgamation, would that put Whakatane more central, and that could actually bring people to, if we had more of a base? So if much the same way that Wellington is the capital of New Zealand, but it used to be Auckland, but Wellington's more central. Is that something that's pie in the sky?
I love it. I think it's great. I think looking at what happened 15 years ago, it's potentially not a reality, but yeah, that would be a very lovely idea, I think. Whether it's a reality, I don't know. I guess the population base for employing people and having headquarters and access is probably more realistically centred in Tauranga. I would expect you'd have service centres located around the region. I would expect your largest organisational entity would likely be based there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no demographer, but globally the trend is people are moving to larger urban areas. So if an organisation that's bay-wide is trying to attract, I don't know, a strategist or an economist, then they're going to say that they want to live in the largest urban area, I'd say.
Councillor Dennis.
I read an article from Thames Council at their options, and one of their options is either Waikato or joining with Tauranga and Western Bay. So I got the impression that Tauranga and Western Bay had already decided where they were going. No?
Not entirely. Those discussions are still going on. In fact, Steve might want to add something there. I think the Thames Coromandel Mayor gave a presentation at the Mayoral Forum recently.
Yes, correct. It's an idea, and conversations are ongoing, but no decisions have been made. Actually, I think Mayor Peter Revel provided a really good presentation to the mayoral forum last week about this idea of a Thames Coromandel sweeping around. It needs to take a bit of hauraki, and then it comes around and collects the Western Bay and Tauranga. It was very well received, but it's just an idea at this stage.
I mean, just to add to that, I think that conversations are still quite open, and I think people are open to lots of different possibilities. Of course, as time goes on, ideas start to cluster around some nodes, and so there's recognition of that, and people start to give less attention to certain ideas because they're unlikely to eventuate. But I think at this stage, there's still people still have quite open minds about things.
This is, moving to option 4, this is, I guess, a more recent exploration based on some of the conversation that came out of the council meeting, the last council meeting on this topic. Rotorua is included in this one, but I guess the option is it could also not be included. Also, there's the option that Western Bay could be included in its entirety or in part. These start to get a little bit complex. If we're thinking about catchments, then it would make sense to include Rotorua, and that's why it is included in this particular image here. That's because those catchments start from those Rotorua lakes and then flow down into Kaituna. Similarly with the Tarawera River, starts from Lake Tarawera and flows down. So that's the catchment connection through into the Western Bay of Plenty. If we so that's really the main benefit, is that it would include that catchment if we take in that part of Western Bay, but it would include Rotorua as well. That would also capture, if it was just the Kaituna catchment, but excluding the Tauranga Moana catchment, it would essentially capture Te Puke, Makatu and Pukahina as well within a region. There'd have to be a boundary alignment drawn for that. Those have been done before. They are inherently quite complex, having worked on one recently, a minor one, between us and Kawerau. There is a lot to work through in terms of rates and legacy finances, assets and who they go to, things like that. So it does add complexity. If we're thinking about catchments too, then you start to wonder about whether Rotorua should be split because part of their catchment runs towards Waikato, and you start to think about that connection of Taupo, which there is that portion that feeds into the Rangataiki catchment. So catchments are a view, and they're definitely a legitimate view. There's a lot going on though as well in terms of the community of interest and economic connection that Western Bay of Plenty area then shares with Tauranga in terms of where do they work, where do they go to school, where they access services, shared infrastructure that they have, water supplies that run from Western Bay into Tauranga to service the city, roading connections, the regional deal. With its Eastern Corridor projects. So there is a lot of different factors that you could look at when we're looking into that west area. And that, I guess, a few disadvantages to note on a plus Western Bay one is those similar ones of simply going bigger. There is the complexity of that as an option, but there's also that dilution of Eastern Bay voice, more iwi partnerships to hold, and what else have I got there? Oh, yeah, that we're getting close to having a full region, but not quite. So you don't quite get the benefits of the full region, and you're still requiring regional council functions to be disaggregated and managed, some of those cross-boundary, without quite getting to the benefits of kind of full scale is probably the final one. So that's the fourth option of the 4. So just, I guess, summarising, there are a range of options, obviously. There's a lot of different ways that those options could shape up, a lot of different permutations that could shape up, depending on what you focus on, whether you're focusing on infrastructure connections, economic connections, iwi connections, catchment connections. So there's a lot of options. For risks, there's ways to mitigate risks both ways. The Mayor's mentioned some of those. If you have catchments that are split, then you need more kind of coordination across those. If you have a bigger region, then we'd want to be really deliberate about like how do we retain local voice, how do we make sure there's a place for local voice within that. So, you know, that's just a couple of examples. If whatever option there is, a strong case can probably be made. And whatever option there is, there's going to be mitigations for the risks that would have to work through. So I guess in summary, there's not necessarily an ideal fit. You know, any option could have a case put forward for it. Given the deadline, what we really need to do is think about which option we are most comfortable with putting forward and really start to put our energy into that one. So, yeah, just so that we can make the progress we need to by that deadline, which is now 32 working days away. So I think that's it from me. I think Kay was going to cover engagement next, but welcome any questions before we...
I just wanted to add, before we get into Kay's section, that I mean, I'm hooked into as many of these kind of forums and groups as possible and chats from across the country. We probably do have a clear and obvious option that ticks a lot of boxes. It won't tick them all. It is really hard from councils out there that don't have a clear and obvious option, like Thames Coromandel, even Taupo, even Rotorua. There isn't a clear option for them to merge with someone, and it's really hard for those councils. We think we've got one that would tick a lot of those boxes.
The thing that worries me about all this is we're concentrating on what option's going to look best or what is going to suit us best. But to me, are we actually retaining the thought of what's best for our local district? Because that seems to be getting lost now, and it's just coming up with what's the best option that we can come out with. But we're forgetting about what's actually best for us as it is. I know central government sort of changed it and said we can't think like that, but nationwide, I don't know whether we're going to lose focus of local. It's my concern.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Whittaker.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, my suggestion was around not having Rotorua in there. Rotorua, I think, should go with Taupo, and they could become a unitary council. We can also control the Kaituna, which is done at the moment by the regional council up at the headwaters of the Rotorua, basically, because another issue that may actually impact is that 25 years ago they put in a wall on Lake Rotoiti to divert water from Rotorua down the Kaituna. Now, back then, I think they talked about a 35 year life, so that may have to be replaced in the future, which is going to be a big cost for someone. So just things to consider.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Emmink.
Thank you. I'd quite like to go back to the idea of, I've just Googled why Marlborough, Nelson and Tasman were set up as 3 separate unitary authorities versus one big one. And it talks about the historical thing about how they used to have a top of the South Regional Council and Kaikoura was in it and Kaikoura went to Canterbury, and the difference in the unique components of each community is why government approved it to set up as 3 unitary. Can we find out where they're sitting now about where they're looking at a macro merge, or whether government is actually happy with that model they already have? Because if they have, I think it would add weight to our Eastern Bay, Western Bay, Tauranga and Rotorua one. So if someone can do a bit of research on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor.
Yeah. Whether or not they're looking into potential proposals. I don't know the answer to that. Certainly from a policy perspective, they're not required to.
Yeah.
And that's the position that I know Gisborne found information about. Gisborne's not so much looking at options, but more looking to consolidate and find out what their community holds most important for their future, but within the territory that they currently are. For Marlborough and Tasman, I'm not sure. They don't have to enter into a process. But that doesn't mean they're not necessarily looking at options.
But just supplementary. So does that mean that as August rolls around, government could, if they're not looking at it, could they decide that they do want a bigger regional unitary? Or you're saying that's not even being talked about by government?
So those unitaries that are formed through the local government commission process don't have to
Do it.
submit a Head Start proposal. They can, but they don't have to.
Yeah. So it adds weight to our ideas of where we want to head towards, doesn't it? You've got that as a bit of a test case. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Should we move to UK?
Apologies.
There we go.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou. So as you know, we have been trying to make the most of a very condensed timeframe for seeking community feedback. You're all familiar with the Kōrero Mai page and information that we've put up. There's been 875 views of that, and we have added in a series of information sessions, the first of which was on Monday evening. Just updating that list there, the Facebook Live is tonight. We had the wrong date on there, so it's Wednesday the 20th. I corrected it. And Tani Atua has been confirmed as well. That was the last one to be confirmed, and that's the last of our engagements on the 6th of July, because clearly we have to call a halt at some point in terms of progressing into the papers. Can you work that for me?
I'll try my best.
So what we have been seeing, we've had 79 responses. So although a lot of people have viewed the page, only 79 have progressed to putting in the survey. Overall, that feedback response, you could call it cautious and largely concerned, with a strong emphasis on protecting local voice, local identity and access to services. Approximately 44 of the respondents clearly favour an Eastern Bay Amalgamated Council as their preferred option. But if you then add in the people who sort of said, we would prefer not to have a larger full Bay of Plenty Amalgamated Council, that takes it up to closer to 50 of those respondents. There's a lot of sentiment analysis that I've done. I'm not sure how much we need to go into it, other than stating that obviously the preference out of that, albeit, a sample of 79, that there is a strong preference for an Eastern Bay scale. Yep. So there was some support there for the full Bay of Plenty unitary, obviously a lower number of responses, and there were quite a few comments that talked about the loss of local voice, the concern of loss of local voice.
I'll just pause you a second, Kay, if I may have a question from Councillor Isles.
Thank you, Mayor. Kay, just going back to the Tani Atua, date is 6th of July, venue is?
The Taniatu Hall in Morrison Street.
Okay, the Fire Brigade Hall.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like the Mayor to comment on the conversations that he has had around iwi engagement.
Thank you. Yeah, I convened a online discussion with iwi chairs, and I've also had various one-on-one conversations and kind of informal discussions as time's gone on. And I suppose I'd characterise those conversations by saying, first of all, I think there's a diverse range of views, particularly around scale. There are some iwi leaders who have a preference for a larger entities, particularly involving Rotorua and possibly beyond that through to Taupo and South Waikato. The others have expressed a preference for smaller entities. I think there's been some support kind of for the approach that Whakatani's taken, and generally comments made about the way we generally engage with iwi, which has been quite interesting, or, you know, it was good to hear. I think some of the issues that have arisen are around retaining integrated thinking, integrated catchment management in particular, a desire to make sure that any co-governance arrangements and those kinds of things are maintained and not harmed in any way by these reforms. There's an interest in making sure we retain whakapapa connections. And not wanting to have more complex kind of relationships than those that currently exist with councils and with the regional council. But those conversations are still ongoing, and it's also kind of there's conversations around the water reforms as well, so it's kind of tied up in a whole bundle of things as well. Councillor Isles?
And also, you're not really hearing that there's a desire to go Tauranga Western Bay, from what you were saying.
I haven't heard that, no.
It tends to be more towards Rotorua.
I suppose what I'm tending to hear is either a preference for kind of maintaining an Eastern Bay sub-region or potentially with Rotorua. I'm not hearing much appetite for Tauranga, although for some people there's an openness to the idea, but I'm not hearing a push in that direction.
Cool.
So looking at the inter-council discussions, Steve, did you want to comment on some of those discussions that are happening at a CE and mayoral level?
Yeah, thank you. So the mayoral forum is obviously meeting and talking about Head Start proposals and options. The mayors also have now a weekly informal catch-up, sharing information. The CEs have a Bay of Plenty CEs forum, and we're meeting regularly on a number of things. Actually, one is on shared services and BOPLES, because there's a bit of a drive towards doing some work in that area, scaling it up, or looking at scaling it up. And of course then Head Start proposals came along, so we're having quite a few conversations about Head Start proposals and how we could collectively or not work together on that. And where the CEs have largely landed is that actually if we can continue sharing information as we move from concepts and ideas through to council decisions, that's going to benefit everybody. We've talked about whether or not there is scope to support a regional approach, so that the region is jointly putting in potentially multiple Head Start proposals, but actually everyone is supporting each other's decisions. So we had a conversation about how powerful that kind of approach could be if every council was supporting each other's decisions. And we've been talking about, a wide variety of scenarios, like some of the ones that were talked about today. To be honest, it is gravitating towards what the team has put in front of you today. Those are the sort of like more plausible or logical ones that are evolving. There are a number of other scenarios that have been crafted, and we've also been talking about whether we just do some background work that explores pros and cons of each of those other options. So when we're doing, when councils are making decisions on reports, that everyone's got the same information around what other potential options there were sort of appended to the report. So there's full information to the public about all the variety of scenarios that had been talked about. That work is just ongoing at the moment.
Councillor Dennis?
Just in regard to that, I appreciate your viewpoint. I think it's really good. In regard to Rotorua, is Rotorua not got any other natural partners apart from us? Is that sort of the implication we're listening to, is that they would actually like to come with us, whether or not we want to?
Yeah, I think Emlyn described it really well earlier. Rotorua is one of those councils that's just in a position where it could go multiple ways, and it could go towards Taupo, it could remain unitary, it could go towards the Western Bay and that Kaituna, it could come towards Eastern Bay. So kind of different from other councils where already their sort of boundaries and their catchments are almost predefined. Rotorua is just in a situation where it could go multiple directions. Rotorua had also started a process just before Head Start got announced to become a unitary council anyway. So they're still having conversations, or that's part of their discussion too, about their original ambition to become a unitary council.
Has there been any thought about a volcanic plateau unitary, like to take in Taupo, that due to the combined forestry industry, agricultural industry, lakes and waterways and water body industry, things like that?
Yes, certainly when I've heard Rotorua talk about the pull towards Taupo, it is that they're talking about those linkages and commonalities around geothermal, forestry, and there was something else. I think that also the tourism, the Rotorua Lakes, Taupo Lake, that's quite similar as well.
Does that include the geothermal industry in Kawerau?
Yes, I have. One of the sort of more obscure options that was talked about was Kawerau, Rotorua, Taupo, but of course the issue for Kawerau there is it only has a contiguous boundary with Whakatane Council.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't separate Kawerau from Whakatane.
And what is the iwi forum preferred view? Is it the Matatua type boundaries?
Yeah, as me and Nandor talked about, there were sort of two divergent views, and largely the way I saw it was those iwi that have tarawera linkages, so and in particular Ngāti Makino with Rangatahi going through into Rotorua. That was a sort of natural catchment link for them, and then the other ones were more sort of focused and worked a lot with Eastern Bay. So it was really about actually the flow of the river and where it took them. But of course, you can also circumvent those sorts of challenges with ensuring that there are management rights and obligations and participation and agreements and things like that. It's one of those things I think that gets figured out in phase 2, depending upon what the Head Start proposal is.
I'll just add a comment, if I may, around Rotorua's options, because that's quite right. I think they have been involved in conversations with different partners because they have a few options. And originally the Head Start proposal said that single territorial authorities couldn't put up a proposal, but it seems that that's shifted now, and the government may be willing to look at them. And I suspect it's a way of them dealing with the question that's come up, is what do you do with stranded councils where a number of councils in a region decide to form up and they leave some outside? What do you do with them? And so, yeah, I suspect it's a way of kind of handling that.
Could I just add to that? There's a lot of complexity in this space. What DIA have actually stated is a single council can become a unitary as part of the Head Start process. However, they will not accept a proposal from one single council to become a unitary. So as an example, hypothetically, if we were to form an Eastern Bay Council with Kawerau and Opotiki, we could also say that we support, as part of that, Rotorua becoming a unitary. And the other councils could say we support an Eastern Bay unitary and we support Rotorua becoming a unitary. But Rotorua couldn't submit themselves on becoming a unitary.
Thank you for that clarification.
They also said, just to follow on from that, sorry, excuse me, was that as long as others in that region were amalgamating, one could become a unitary on its own. So that was the other clause that they had.
And just to emphasise a point that Steve made earlier, because of course the discussions in the mayoral among mayors are very similar, as you'd expect and hope, as the discussions taking place among CEs. And I think among the mayors there's a real interest in presenting, if we do decide to go down a Head Start pathway, presenting a regional proposal, even if it's divided, it could be sliced up in different ways, so you could have sub-regional unitaries involved, but we present it as a region so that it's clear to the government this is supported across the region and we're supporting each other, and it's kind of one package, which I think it definitely does make it more powerful. A couple of other comments I was going to say was, I think there's very open and frank discussion among mayors. As Steve said, we've moved to a weekly online catch-up. They're pretty good, honest discussions. I think that's really helpful, and the really good working relationship we have with mayors across the Bay of Plenty, and of course in particular in the Eastern Bay, where we work together in any case quite a lot. I think that makes all these conversations a lot easier. And it means we can get to where we want to go. There's been quite a bit of support for each other, like for example around comms and things like that. Different councils are supporting each other, which I think is really helpful and taking inspiration from what each other's doing. And I think, as I said before, there is a general real openness to possibilities, but it does seem like things are shaping up into some pretty clear pathways forward. So, yeah. Councillor Hamill.
Could you or someone give us an update on what the latest thinking is from Western Bay Council, and based on what you've said, Emlyn, could TCC set up a unitary themselves?
They couldn't submit a proposal to become a unitary themselves. The DIA wouldn't accept it. But again, they could become a unitary as part of a Bay of Plenty-wide proposal. So I think one of the options there was everyone apart from Tauranga forming a unitary, and then by default, then Tauranga City would become a unitary as part of that proposal. Steve would probably give you a better idea about the latest thinking. My understanding is that it's still a Tauranga Western Bay option. Looks the front runner at the moment, but Steve would I've probably told you a bit too much there. Steve, save me.
I'll just agree with you, actually. I think it's early days in that conversation. They've got a bit to figure out. They also have their regional deal sitting in parallel, which is essentially a Tauranga and Western Bay Council regional deal with government.
And their water as well.
It is, and their waters, sorry, that's right, and their waters agreement. So there's a few things already pulling some strong gravity towards Tauranga Western Bay unitary council. The other bit, though, that is interesting was this concept of taking all of that water frontage right up through Coromandel, so I think that's another option, and in some ways too, I think for Western Bay, which may feel it's going to get subsumed by a big huge Tauranga city, might feel that actually having some of that additional Coromandel sort of thinking, smaller communities, beachfront, rural properties, all of that would be a useful balance going into the Tauranga conversation. But I think, yeah, as Officer Hatch said, I think Tauranga Western Bay is definitely an option that's a bit of a front runner, but that whole Coromandel one is quickly approaching as well.
Just going back to the feedback and engagement, once the public meetings have concluded, then we'll come back to you at the next workshop, at the next opportunity, with a more in-depth analysis of what's come through online and the sentiment that's come through in the public meetings. Just wanted to assure you of that. Move to the next slide. Back to you, Walt.
As I mentioned earlier, we do have from today 32 working days, so that's very little time until the deadline for those outline proposals. Less time than that if we consider that to get to that stage we need all councils to have approved our proposal, and then from there cabinet decisions are in September, which what our preference may or may not get across the line, I guess. So we might have to be prepared for whatever that looks like. From there, there's another process which also has reasonable urgency, because between cabinet decisions in September through to March next year is a refinement period for proposals. So whatever comes out of cabinet decisions, there'll be another body of work that is required. And in particular, if the cabinet decisions are not aligned to what our preferences might be, we'll want to make sure that we have the influence that we need to have to make sure that the things that we hold most important for our communities are expressed in how that proposal is then refined and shaped up. So 9 August isn't quite the finish line. It's not even a halfway point. As we work towards 9 August, just to give you some assurance that we have some more touch points with council that we intend to use, just to make sure that we're stepping through this process, and that's just the dates on the table there. From today, there is a staff grouping that's working at the Eastern Bay of Plenty level to start to shape something up, and I guess what we're really taking from today is some level of comfort, or intending to take from today is some level of comfort that that's the direction that this should be going, given that there are obviously numerous permutations possible.
Thank you. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mayor Nundall. I'm not sure whether or not the council as a group is ready to do this or not, but it would be useful to come away from today with a bit of guidance or direction on where myself, the staff, should be focusing our energy and resources. Just putting that on the table.
Thank you. So I guess what's being asked for is a bit of an indication about where we think we might want to head. Councillor Oz, I know you had your hand up. I'm not sure if you were going to make that point or something else, but...
Well, I can do both if you like. Firstly, my initial response would be very central Eastern Bay, Whakatane, Poriki, Kaurau. If we had to go to the bigger side, it would definitely be leaning towards Rotorua. My next question was, just coming back to the timeline in front of us, although the Cabinet make a decision in September 26, if there's a change of government in November, have we got a definite lead as to how a new coalition might address this? We've been told in the past that they would still be going along those lines, but do we know exactly what would be the outcome?
My response would be we don't know exactly what would be the outcome. The general message I think we've got is that broadly the suite of reforms will continue,
Right.
but there might be some, they've talked about changing the relationship with local governments, which would be helpful. I suspect we might see some changes in details, like possibly maybe some of the timeframes might ease off, or there might be some other things like that. But I think the sense I get is that broadly it's going to continue, and acknowledging that amalgamation has been a objective of the Labor Party in the past, I think we can expect that there'll be, even if there's a change of government, they'll use the momentum that's already generated to continue.
Cool. Can I have a supplementary? Earlier in a discussion that we'd had with our chief executive, Steve was sort of outlined the fact that there's so much work to be done from a staffing perspective. Are those timeframes, they're not realistic really, are they? Or those timelines aren't realistic, that we could possibly have all this in place by, if we're accepted, as it be prior to the 2028 elections?
And Steve might want to respond as well. My thinking is that if we decide to develop a Head Start proposal, one of the questions before us would be whether, as part of that, we make a play for more time to say, look, this is what we think it should look like, but we can't be ready for 28, we could be ready for 31, and sketch out a bit of a pathway. Now, the government may not accept that as a Head Start proposal, or they might. There's so much uncertainty. DIA have said that any Head Start proposals which aren't accepted will inform their advice to ministers about any backstop legislation. But again, the minister the other day sounded slightly different. Part of the difficulty is that ministers and, now MCERT, but the ministry's advice isn't always entirely consistent. But that would be a question whether that's one of the things we would want to put into our Head Start as a longer extended transition. Do you want to add anything to that, Steve? Or?
No, I was going to say exactly that, actually. The change. Yeah, I sort of am struggling to see how you could do it by 2028. It means that there would be no consultation between on new constituencies. I just can't see how that would work, and actually I just don't think that is the right thing to do in this community. But yeah, so 2031. Yeah, it's all about trying to figure out the timeline and putting in that proposal. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Emmink.
Thank you. Emily, can I just ask you to go to the last slide that you had the maps on, please, before I make my comment? Oh, we've got maps in now. No, not those maps.
Very last page.
The last page. Yeah. Keep up, Em. I agree with Andrew. I think Eastern Bay is what our community would prefer, and I would like us to support Rotorua being their own independent unitary rather than us join them. But my question is, who put this map up? Because this almost looks like a predetermined what government might like. Or is this, we just put this map up?
Sorry, you're referring to the map on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
That map just shows the status quo. So that's the regional boundaries are in red, and then the district boundaries are in blue. So it's just purely there to show this is the status quo arrangements.
Yeah, I think my fear is when you look at that and you're in government, it looks like a pretty natural decision. But my preference would be Eastern Bay, but that worried me when I saw it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other? Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I support what Leslie's just said, and Andrew as well. I think the logical for us at this stage is the Eastern Bay. I appreciate the timeline and the issues that there would be with the timeline. It's just when you listen to like the minister last night, you're either on the bus or you're not. So I'm just not sure how well us going out there saying we can't meet your timelines would go down, and would it affect our Head Start application? So I just think we would need to get further guidance from DIA or something on that before we went down that path. I support it, but I just would like a little bit more clarification, because I'd hate to get kicked off the bus for that.
No, thank you. I think that's a discussion we can have further down the track, but you've raised exactly the concern. What I might do is go around everyone who hasn't indicated. If you don't want to indicate, that's fine, but I'll just give everyone an opportunity. So I'll start with you, Councillor Dennis. Do you want to say an opinion?
There are some negatives to go to Eastern Bay, only because I think you'll find that we would become, as a unitary, the highest group of deprivation in the whole country, really, because even Northland would have booming spots like Whangarei and et cetera, and down towards Rodney. But in saying that, I believe Eastern Bay is a natural fit. I've even heard some people say they don't want to go to Rotorua, even though iwi links and et cetera like that. And so, I would say we'll have to live with the consequences of the highest deprivation rate in New Zealand, but I think it's a natural fit.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hamill?
I'm still fairly neutral. Obviously we've got Eastern Bay as a strong connection, so I'm supportive of that. But I'm I haven't been assured yet of how Quayside Holdings losing that would unfold, and that's probably some of the biggest concerns that I've had reflected to me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Brien?
Just a question. If we were inclined towards an Eastern Bay and then central government says, oh, actually, we don't like that, go back and find an option, or we're going to enable the backstop. Is that what could happen? Will they give us an option and say, well, go back and find another option?
Yeah, all of those options are a possibility, yeah.
Anyway, I'm all for the Eastern Bay. I think I can work with the iwi within this place and space to make this work for us all. It'll be easier for me to work with these, as iwi members within the space. We're in there already. And I think we've got some pretty close relationships, and we can work with our iwi and our trusts as well as to how we can support this. So that's where I'm headed, Eastern Bay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jones?
Yeah, I've still got an open mind. To me, local is still very important. So I guess it's at the moment Eastern Bay, but I don't know, I just can't sort of see the whole thing nationwide as actually achieving what the government's setting out, what they feel is going to happen. And I mean, you look at the likes of Switzerland and some of the Scandinavian countries that have hundreds of councils, and they all seem to operate really, really well. So, jury's still out on this one for me, but if push comes to shove, probably Eastern Bay. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Whittaker?
My preference would be option one with Eastern Bay, but I still would like to explore the fact that we bring Te Puke in as another option. I guess we've got to look at unitary councils in the past, and Gisborne is a good example of one that hasn't worked. For years they pumped their sewage straight out into the ocean because they dillied and dallied about actually putting the cost onto ratepayers of putting into a serviceable sort of waste system. They've also hasn't worked with the forestry up the east coast, where their environmental side wasn't actually working well enough to actually control all the slash that came down to Tolaga Bay, etc., in the rivers. So we've got to look at what happens when you spread yourself or you become a unitary council. If you can have an environmental side, it's got to be able to look after the environment. not just be there as a token gesture.
Thank you, Councillor. For myself, I agree with Councillor James. I'm not sure that these reforms are going to deliver what the government says that they intend. I'm not sure what the government intends, actually. But, yeah, and that's part of the difficulty, is trying to clarify what are the outcomes they want from this. I'm, like most councillors, I think I support an Eastern Bay sub-regional approach. That seems to be the mood of the community. There's some obvious reasons. I do think if we were to go bigger, then going with Rotorua would be the way to go, because I also share Councillor Dennis's concerns around the deprivation, the economic deprivation, financial deprivation across the Eastern Bay, so that's a concern. And share Councillor Whittaker's concern around making sure that we are able to actually fulfil the environmental protection functions that Regional Council currently fills, which is not really a big thing on our radar. I mean, environmental stuff, we're all concerned about it, but it's not a core business of ours in the same way. And so I think if we do develop this Head Start approach, as I said earlier, I think some really rigorous thinking around how we deliver those regional functions is really critical. Thank you. I guess that gives you clear direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so that's the end of that item. We'll break for lunch. When we come back, we'll be going into public excluded. So, yeah, we'll pause there. Yeah. Yes, huge piece of work. Yeah.